We are reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. It is definitely volume 6, Uniting Two Worlds. Beyond there, I'm at a loss. It must be quite close to the beginning. Because we just started this volume recently.
Yeah, it's please distribute books.
Excuse me.
I don't know. Anybody remembers where we stopped?
Anyway, it's all nice. We can just pick up from anywhere and then.
I read everything here a few days ago.
Well, let's just read here. If it happens to be something that we've read before, it's no problem. It's always nice to hear it again. Okay, so the chapter's entitled Please Distribute Books. Tom Beaudry. Does that ring a bell? Is that something we've already read? Tom Beaudry was living with his wife in Santa Cruz, California. This is Tripurari Maharaj, right? Tom Beaudry, yeah. Tom Beaudry was living with his wife in Santa Cruz, California. After attending a festival in Berkeley celebrating Lord Chaitanya's appearance, where he chanted all day, and after reading Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, he felt he should become Srila Prabhupada's disciple. He began chanting and trying to interest his wife and friends in Krishna consciousness. When a traveling party of brahmacharis arrived to start a center in Santa Cruz, he told them he wanted to join, but they were skeptical. Then one day he showed up with a shaved head and dhoti. Okay, we'll read this bit again. Tom Beaudry, I began going out every day with the chanting party. Then gradually I began to break away from the kirtan party to sell small books in shopping centers. One day I came back and one of the brahmacharis, Sarvabhauma, criticized me. He asked me how many big books I had sold. I said, I didn't sell any. He said, how many did you bring with you? I said, I didn't have any to bring with me. Then you're in Maya, he said. You didn't bring any big books. How do you expect to sell them? Prabhupada wants these big books sold. So I thought to myself, gee, I must be in Maya. I said, how do you sell these books? He said, you pray to Prabhupada. Prabhupada gives you the mercy. So I thought, well, that makes sense. That's how everything works in Krishna consciousness. I went to my house, I thought about it, and prayed to Prabhupada that I could sell these big books. I prayed all evening and then took rest. In the morning, I got up and it was on my mind. Excuse me. So I put out one big book, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, in my bag of small books. But in the course of selling the small books, I forgot about the big book. Suddenly, a lady came up to me and said, what is that big book you have there? Then I remembered Prabhupada in my prayers, and I said, this is the Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. I gave her the book, and she gave me $3. When I got back to the temple, I told the devotees how Prabhupada had sold a book. Pragosh. I was coming regularly to the Detroit temple for classes in the evening, and I was doing some odd work to help the devotees prepare the temple. Every night I would be painting, and I would watch the devotees coming back from Sankirtan. They seemed very ecstatic and enlivened, and I was always a little curious about what they did out there that made them come back like this. I would be up on my ladder painting and listening to them talk as they sat on the floor drinking hot milk. They would talk about how they had knocked on one man's door and this had happened and then that had happened. It was very attractive to me. After I moved into the temple and had been a devotee about a week, someone asked me if I would like to go out and try distributing books. So I went out wearing a dhoti and tilak and using a straightforward presentation, walking up to people, giving them a card and a book, telling them about the contents of the book, showing them Prabhupada's picture and asking for a donation. The exhilaration I got from that was just incredible. It became extremely blissful to go out and do this. None of us could actually put a finger on why it was so ecstatic. We used to lie awake at night. All the brahmacharis stayed in one big room, and we would lie there on the floor in our sleeping bags, whispering to each other, what did you say to the people out there? There would be all these conversations going on in the room at night with the lights out and everyone talking, trying to relate how we were presenting Prabhupada's books. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So we're halfway down the page 14, Jagadatri. It's interesting, he was saying that at night he went to bed kind of meditating on that desire, and in the morning when he woke up it was on his mind. It's actually a psychological trick that we can use. It's actually a fact that the mood or what's on your mind last thing at night, just as you're falling asleep, that actually affects how you wake up the next morning. So if you fall asleep in a very kind of negative frame of mind, then you'll wake up in a negative frame of mind. Or if you go to sleep thinking, oh no, I'm only going to get 5.75 hours sleep tonight, I'm going to be really tired in the morning when I wake up. When you wake up in the morning, it's a psychological thing that you wake up feeling tired. So you can actually trick your mind that, okay, I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning in a really positive frame of mind. I'm going to be awake, I'm going to be refreshed, and I'm going to be enthusiastic to chant Hare Krishna. And you can actually train your mind that way. And when you wake up the next morning, you'll actually wake up in a positive frame of mind. So if we can actually trick our minds into waking up kind of positively Krishna conscious, and then that affects the whole rest of the day. The rest of the day is actually affected in a very kind of positive way by that. Okay. Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya, Jai Nityananda, Jai Advaita Chandra, Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya, Jai Nityananda, Jai Advaita Chandra, Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jai Jai Sri Chaitanya, Jai Nityananda, Jai Advaita Chandra, Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. So we're reading from the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 16, the Lord's attempt to go to Vrindavan. And we're beginning at text 209. There's quite a few verses before there's a purport, so we'll just go through the English. And then we'll do the Bengali for text number 217. Excuse me. The Lord stayed there for 7 days and delivered all kinds of offenders and sinners. Leaving Kulia, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu visited the house of Arya at Shantipur. It was there that the Lord's mother, Sachimata, met him and was thus relieved of her great unhappiness. The Lord then visited the village known as Ramakeli and the place known as Kanai Natashala. From there, he returned to Shantipur. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu stayed in Shantipur for 10 days. This has all been described very elaborately by Vrindavan Das Thakur. I will not narrate these incidents because they have already been described by Vrindavan Das Thakur. There is no need to repeat the same information, for such repetition would unlimitedly increase the size of this book. Those narrations tell how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu met the brothers Rupa and Sanatan, and how Nrsingananda decorated the road. I have already described these in an earlier synopsis of this book. Therefore, I will not repeat the narration here. This information is given in Adi Leela 1035 and Madhya Leela 155 to 162 and 175 to 226. 216. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu returned to Shantipur, Raghunath Das came to meet him. So this is text number 217. We can try and chant the Bengali. Hiranya Govardhana Dui Sahodhara. Hiranya Govardhana Dui Sahodhara. Hiranya Govardhana Dui Sahodhara. Saptagrame Bara Laksha Mudrara Ishwara. Saptagrame Bara Laksha Mudrara Ishwara. Saptagrame Bara Laksha Mudrara Ishwara. Hiranya Govardhana Dui Sahodhara. Govardhana Dui Sahodara Saptagrami Bara Laksha Mudrara Ishvara Saptagrami Bara Laksha Mudrara Ishvara Hiranya Govardhana Dui Sahodara Saptagrami Bara Laksha Mudrara Ishvara Bolo bolo Hiranya Govardhana Dui Sahodara Saptagrami Bara Laksha Mudrara Ishvara Hiranya Govardhana Dui Sahodara Saptagrami Bara Laksha Mudrara Ishvara Hiranya Govardhana Dui Sahodara Saptagrami Bara Laksha Mudrara Ishvara. Ladies. Hiranya Govardhana Dui Sahodara Saptagrami Bara Laksha Mudrara Ishvara Hiranya Govardhana Dui Sahodara Saptagrami Bara Laksha Mudrara Ishvara. We'll just go through the word for word. Hiranya Govardhana Dui Sahodara, two brothers. Saptagrame, in the village named Saptagram. Bara Laksha, 1,200,000. Mudrara, of coins. Ishwara, the masters. Translation. Two brothers named Hiranya and Govardhan, who were residents of Saptagram, had an annual income of 1,200,000 rupees, which I was told last night is roughly £12,000, which was an awful lot 500 years ago. Hiranya and Govardhan were inhabitants of Saptagram in the district of Hooghly. Actually, they were inhabitants not of Saptagram, but of a nearby village named Krishnapur. They took their birth in a big Kayasta family, and although their family title has not been ascertained, it is known that they came from an aristocratic family. The elder brother's name was Hiranya Majumdar, and the younger brother's name was Govardhan Majumdar. Sri Raghunath Das was the son of Govardhan Majumdar. Their family priest was Balaram Acharya, who was a favorite of Haridas Thakur's, and the family's spiritual master was Yadunandan Acharya, a favorite of Vasudev Das. The village of Saptagram is located on the Eastern Railway from Calcutta to Bur station is called Trishabika. In those days, there was a large river there known as the Saraswati, and present-day Trishabika is a great port. In 1592, the Pathans invaded, and due to a flooding of the Saraswati River in the year 1632, this great port was partially destroyed. It is said that in the 17th and 18th centuries, Portuguese businessmen used to come aboard their ships. In those days, Saptagram, situated on the southern side of Bengal, was very rich and popular. The merchants, who were the principal residents, were called Saptagram Suvarnavaniks. There were very many rich people there, and Hiranya Majumdar and Govardhan Majumdar belonged to the Kayasta community. They also were very rich, so much so that it is mentioned in this verse that their annual income as landlords amounted to 1,200,000 rupees. In this connection, one may refer to the Adi Leela, chapter 11, verse 41, which describes Udaran Dat, who also belonged to the Saptagrami Suvarnavanik community. Omagyanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Yuta Padakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vatam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Padajana Sahitam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakam Vatamscha Nama Om Vishnudaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nivishesha Sunyavadi Pastichadishatarane Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubheva Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. It's interesting, I had a quick look at the purport for the verse that Prabhupada mentions right at the end regarding Udarandat, and it's quite a similar kind of structure of purport. I won't read the whole thing because it's a very long one, but I'll just read the first kind of portion of it. Udarandat Thakur, the 11th among the 12 cowherd boys, was an exalted devotee of Lord Nityananda Prabhu. He worshipped the lotus feet of Lord Nityananda in all respects. Prabhupada's purport. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur writes in his Anubhashya, the Gaura Ganodesha Dipika states that Udarandat Thakur was formerly the cowherd boy of Vrindavan named Subahu. Udarandat Thakur, previously known as Sri Udarandat, was a resident of Saptagram, which is situated on the bank of the Saraswati River near the Trishabiga railway station in the district of Hooghly. At the time of Udaran Thakur, Saptagram was a very big town encompassing many other places, such as Vasudevpura, Banshabedia, Krishnapur, Nityanandapur, Shivapur, Sankaranagara, and Saptagram. And then the next, I won't read too much because it is very long, but the next paragraph begins, Calcutta was developed under British rule by the influential mercantile community and especially by the Suvarnavanik community who came down from Saptagram to establish their businesses and homes all over Calcutta. And then he kind of goes on to give the kind of a little of the history of the Suvarnavanik community, especially the Sil and the Day families. So why would that be particularly relevant? Why would Srila Prabhupada feel kind of somehow drawn to speak about them? Who can say, Mother Vrinda?
What Day was the family he was in?
Yeah, and he, yeah.
Was he married into his, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's it. It's because it's his own, he's speaking about his own family. And then he goes on to say that, we also took birth in this particular family. And, he kind of goes on to speak a little of his own history. So it's kind of thing that, at the beginning of both airports, it's a more sort of specifically about this particular part of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the personalities, the places that Lord Chaitanya was interacting with and was visiting. And then in both purports, he just goes on. It's very similar to kind of the things we've been speaking about over the last few weeks, that, he goes on to speak in quite great detail about the places and the history around the places and the kind of culture surrounding the places, which in some ways doesn't appear to be directed with either Krishna consciousness in general or Lord Chaitanya's pastimes in particular. But he goes into great lengths to speak about this. Now, Srila Prabhupada has said on a number of occasions that his purports are his personal ecstasies. This is not just some academic exercise of translating a book and giving an academic purport. Although Prabhupada's books are very academic, they do require quite intense study and study skills, and we get much more benefit and a much richer experience of reading Srila Prabhupada's books if we're guided through those books in something of an academic structure. But still, they don't conform to what may be described as academic rules and regulations. Prabhupada, this is a flow of ecstasy that's coming from Srila Prabhupada's consciousness onto the pages of these books. And, we may be somewhat excused for wondering, well, what has any of this got to do with Chaitanya Charitamrita? Prabhupada's talking about all these places and train stations, and in some places he goes to great details to describe, if you go down this road and then take a left and then cross over a fence and go across this field. And, he goes to all this detail to describe all these different places, which are quite somewhat inconsequential, but not inconsequential in the sense that because they're connected with Lord Chaitanya in some small way, or because they're connected with Lord Chaitanya's devotees in some small way, then it becomes very, very, very relevant. So this really exposes the mind of a transcendentalist, of a pure devotee like Srila Prabhupada, that anything that reminds one of Krishna becomes relevant. And the thing is that for a pure devotee, everything reminds him of Krishna. And so everything becomes relevant. Everything that Srila Prabhupada sees reminds him of Krishna. And so he can, we were going for a walk a few days ago with my children, and my youngest boy, I was quite impressed. He started playing this game where he said, say a word, any word, just random words. And whatever I said, he would somehow try and connect that to Krishna. So I would say, okay, toaster. Oh, we can make toast and offer it to Krishna. And any word, he would find a way of kind of connecting that to Krishna. And it was nice. It was inspiring. So this is the mood of a devotee. And the opposite end of the spectrum is that, there's this, not the opposite end, the thing we want to move away from is the materialistic consciousness. Now, Srila Prabhupada has explained on many, many times that in the material world, the center of all enjoyment is sex life. Prabhupada speaks about this quite a lot. Now, we also understand that there is gross sex life and there is subtle sex life. So by sex life, it is meant this desire to lord it over material nature, be the Lord of all we survey, be the center of all enjoyment, the center of everything that exists in the material world. But there is quite a famous picture. I remember, I'm not going to go into the details of it because it's not a very Krishna conscious thing. But I remember when I was very young, actually. So this goes to show what an impression these things, how impressionable young minds are. I remember when I was very young, I was in a friend's house. I was probably about 7 or 8 years old at the time. And they had a picture on the wall. And I don't know if the picture was written by Sigmund Freud. Anyone who knows who Sigmund Freud is, this kind of famous philosopher. And his philosophy was that, everything is all connected to sex. And they had a picture on the wall, and the picture was called What's on a Man's Mind. And it was a picture, some of you may have seen this picture, but it was a picture of a man's face. And when it was like a double take thing. You looked at it and then looked again, and you realized that what was happening was that the different parts of the man's face was actually basically a drawing of a naked woman. I'm not going to go into the details, but the eyebrow was one thing and the nose was one thing. And, if you really want to know, you can probably Google it, but I wouldn't recommend it. And anyway, but the idea is that this is kind of what's on a person's mind, or at least on a man's mind all the time. And there's even some, it's a statistic which is very regularly quoted, but is actually being proved incorrect. But there's some statistic that says like men think of sex every 7 seconds or something like that, which is not actually true. But it is a fact that if we allow our minds to wander, and if we allow our minds to follow their own course, eventually they will bring us to either gross or subtle sex life. They will take us away from Krishna and bring us into this consciousness of wanting to enjoy the material world, wanting to enjoy sex life, and wanting to experience an existence separate from Krishna. So eventually our minds will take us to this point. So, Krishna says very clearly in the Bhagavad Gita that, the mind is the friend of the conditioned soul or his enemy as well. For one whose mind is controlled, the mind is the best friend. But for one whose mind is uncontrolled, the mind is the worst enemy. So for an uncontrolled mind and for a mind that is not Krishna conscious, then it's inevitable that our consciousness will eventually take us, and not only that our mind will take us away from Krishna, but that everything that we see in the world, everything that we come in contact with, will remind us in some way, or will take our consciousness in some way to this consciousness of sense gratification, sense enjoyment, and a consciousness of separation from Krishna. So this is exactly the opposite of what we're seeing here, that for the mind of a pure devotee, everything that they see takes them to Krishna. Whereas for the uncontrolled mind, or for the mind that is either struggling to become Krishna conscious or is not at all Krishna conscious, then that mind, everything that they see takes them further and further away from Krishna. So Prabhupada is showing here by his own example that everything reminds him of Krishna. Everything reminds him of Krishna, and everything brings him to Krishna. All these small little details mean so much because they're connected to the pure devotees of the Lord, because they're connected to Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. That, that field that we walk over and that we pass through, and the lane that we walk down, and the train station, and it's all somehow connected to Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. And so it means so much. It means everything to the mind of Prabhupada, because it reminds them of Krishna. So everything can remind us of Krishna, but we have to train the mind. We actually have to consciously, and it's hard work. It's not going to come spontaneously. Hopefully in due course of time, it will come spontaneously, that everything that we see will remind us of Krishna. But until we're on that platform of spontaneously seeing everything in relation with Krishna, then we have to train ourselves to see everything in relationship with Krishna. And we train ourselves to be reminded of Krishna by everything. So whatever we see around us, we can do it as a personal exercise. How can this remind me of Krishna? How this remind me of Krishna? Obviously, it's a lot easier when you're living in an environment like this, where every single thing that you can see, you can point at it and say, that belongs to Kodanitai Maya Pushashi, that belongs to Kodanitai Maya Pushashi, that belongs to Kodanitai Maya Pushashi. Every single brick and every piece of dust on the road and every blade of grass, it all belongs to the deities. So it can all remind us of the deities, and it can all remind us of, well, how can we make it even nicer for the deities? How can we beautify it even more? How can we improve things even more? How can we make things even more beautiful for people who come here, so that they're attracted to the service of the deities? But then when we step outside of this environment and we start walking down the road and we walk to the village, although it's probably been a while, it's been a while for most of us since we've done that. But there is a world that exists outside of this little kind of bubble here. And when we step into that environment, it can be harder and harder and harder to be reminded of Krishna, and it becomes easier and easier to be distracted from Krishna. And the material energy is a very, 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 very powerful medium. It can literally. I remember as a very young Bhakta, literally probably weeks after I'd just weeks or maybe a month or two after I'd moved into the ashram, and I was out doing distribution in Gala Shields, which is in the kind of near the borders in Scotland, and I was working opposite Woolworths, which doesn't even exist anymore, but there was a very well-known chain store called Woolworths, and in Woolworths' window there was a big display for a movie, and I used to really like to go to the cinema. I used to really like watching movies, so that was a big thing for me. And there was a big window display for a movie that had just been released on, probably not even DVDs didn't exist then, it had been released on video, and I could literally feel my head getting dragged towards this thing. I was trying to concentrate on the service, and it was like I could feel myself being pulled and just staring at this poster, you know, and there was nothing, you know, I mean, once you've seen it once, twice, 3 times, there's nothing else to see. But it was like it was literally just dragging me towards it. And I could feel the material energy actually pulling me towards it. It was quite unsettling. It was quite unsettling. And, you know, that's when we're out and we're distributing books, or we're on Harinam, or we're just going about, we're shopping for the deities. There are so many things out there which are designed very, very, you know, people pay a lot of money, like hundreds and thousands, millions of pounds. They pay to marketing experts, you know, how to actually design posters and advertisements and things in such a way that it has the biggest effect. And we can also use that. Like we had Ajita Prabhu, who's an expert in social media and marketing. He was here, I don't know, about 1.5 years ago. And he was actually recommending we read one particular book. I have the book, but I forget the name of it. But it was by a marketing expert who was saying, if you use this color with this color, and if you use this kind of font, and if you use these size letters combined with these size letters, you know, and it's a very technical, intricate science. But if you put all these different things together, this is the effect it will have on the consciousness. You know, and so they're using these things to pull in people's consciousness. So the material world is really, especially in Kali Yuga, the nature of Kali Yuga is that the people who are sort of running things in Kali Yuga are doing things in such a way to really draw our consciousness away from Krishna and towards sense enjoyment, towards sense gratification. And kind of going back to this point, you know, they tend to use, in some form or another, either gross or subtle, then sex is used to sell these things, knowing well that this is the thing that really attracts the consciousness of the conditioned living entity. So the material world is not an easy place to remember Krishna. And as soldiers in Lord Chaitanya's army and as soldiers in Srila Prabhupada's army, we have as part of our responsibility for at least part of the time in our life, we have this responsibility to kind of at least do a tour of duty. You know, we may not be lifelong frontline troops, we may or may not be, but everyone should do a tour of duty for Srila Prabhupada and for Lord Chaitanya. So we can't just hide away from the world. We have to go out there and share Krishna consciousness with the world. And in that situation, being Krishna conscious is not an easy thing. So how do we always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna? How can everything remind us of Krishna? How can everything help to keep our mind focused on Krishna when it's designed to do exactly the opposite? It's designed to take our mind away from Krishna. So the answer is that, especially for those of us who are in the kind of early stages of Krishna consciousness, those of us who may be, you know, Vaidhi sadhana bhaktas who are on the path of regulated devotional service, our Vaidhi sadhana has got to be very, very, very strong and very, very intense to actually have the effect. Because one of the purposes of performing regulated devotional service is to train the mind to always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. And we do this by an intense program of hearing about Krishna, chanting about Krishna, reading about Krishna, studying about Krishna, memorizing about Krishna. And in this way, training the mind to be absorbed in Krishna consciousness. You know, we can engage our body in Krishna's service, and from that will come purification of heart. But if the body is engaged in Krishna's service, but the mind is absorbed in thoughts of material sense enjoyment, then the mind will, in due course of time, pull us away from that service, drag us away from that service. And it may not just drag us away from the service mentally. You know, it may be that we're doing our service to Krishna physically, but mentally we're absorbed in something else. But in due course of time, it may even pull us away physically. Just like, you know, this poster was literally trying to physically, it began with the mind, and then it was literally pulling the body towards, I wanted to walk into Woolworths and check out the video. I didn't, but I wanted to, and I could feel myself being pulled towards that. And probably the fact that the reason I didn't was because my Sankirtan leader was about 20 yards down the road keeping an eye on me. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened. So, it's a fact that, Maya, the material energy, is quite capable of practically physically pulling us away from our service. But if our mind is very much fixed on remembering Krishna, then this puts us into a situation of somewhat safety. So and by doing this in due course of time, all these aspects of the material energy, they will in due course of time prove to be our friends because they will remind us of Krishna. But until we're on this platform of spontaneous transcendence, like someone like Srila Prabhupada, we're not necessarily going to be reminded of Krishna. And we may even experience, I have personal experience of being in a place like Vrindavan or Mayapur, and you're in the atmosphere of Krishna consciousness, but a pretty girl walks past. It doesn't matter whether you're right slap bang in Krishna's eternal home. If the mind or if the consciousness is not properly trained in Krishna consciousness, you can be distracted in any situation, even in Vrindavan, even in Mayapur, even in Jagannath Puri. We can be attracted by whatever it happens to be that we're attracted to, whether it's the pretty girls or the handsome boys or the whatever else we see. We can be distracted from Krishna even in a place like Vrindavan. What to speak of Glasgow or London, these kind of places. So training the mind to be very, very focused on Krishna consciousness, having a very, actually understanding the urgency, the very dangerous situation that we're in, that our minds at any time can take us away from Krishna. And the only way to counteract that is by absorbing our minds in Krishna consciousness. So, these books that Srila Prabhupada has given, they're not just there to be distributed. They're there to really absorb our mind, really absorb our consciousness, read as much as we possibly can, hear as much as we possibly can, associate with devotees as much as we can, speak about Krishna, talk about Krishna, have as much kirtan as possible. We can easily fall into this trap of being satisfied with the basic minimum of Krishna consciousness, the basic number of rounds, the basic amount of kirtan that is there as part of the temple schedule, the basic amount of reading that we do as part of our temple program. And we can easily fall into the trap of thinking, well, that's fine, that's enough. If that's what the temple program is, then you don't need any more than that. But we actually need to be absorbed in Krishna consciousness 24 hours a day. Srila Prabhupada said we should read his books any time we get time, whenever we get time. Even if we have 1 minute, we can learn a sloka or read a book. I'm a terrible example. I know probably more than anyone how easy it is to fall into the trap of, okay, I've got a minute free, let's check out Facebook, let's check out the news, let's check the weather, and so but when I look back over the last few years, especially since this digital revolution which has happened over the last decade or so, and I look at just how many hours of my life, how many days, how many weeks, how many months of my life have I spent staring at my phone, staring at my computer screen, instead of staring at the Srimad Bhagavatam, or I probably could have learned these books off by heart in the last 10 years if I'd put as much effort into reading those as I had into reading Facebook. So we have the time, but we have to learn to use the time. We have to learn how to actually use our time to our advantage. And all these things, such as social media, technology, advertisements, all these different mediums which exist in the world, they're designed to take us away from Krishna. So we can use these things, and we should use these things, and we will use these things to serve Krishna. But we can't allow our lives to be, controlled by these mediums. And actually, take us away from Krishna, like drag us away from Krishna. You know, the more we read, the more we study, the more we learn, the more we memorize, the more we chant, the more we sing, the more everything in the world is actually going to remind us of Krishna. The more, and actually Srila Prabhupada, not only Srila Prabhupada, but actually many of the acharyas have set their own, you know, in one sense, none of them needed to do this because they're nitya siddhas, they're eternally liberated souls. There's never a time when they didn't remember Krishna. But many of them actually gave this example. Srila Prabhupada gave this example. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave this example. And I'm sure there are others as well. That before they began their preaching mission, they first of all spent a significant period of time remaining in one place and becoming very intensely, deeply absorbed in sadhana and bhajan. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he took a vow of chanting, was it 1 billion names? He took a vow of chanting 1 billion names. And if you go to Mayapur, we were there just a few months ago. You visit the actual Bhajan Kutir where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta sat, and it's part of the Chaitanya Gaudiya Math where he established his temple later on. But you can visit the very simple hut where he sat for as long as it took and chanted 1 billion names of Krishna before he began the mission of establishing the Gaudiya Math. Srila Prabhupada went to the Radha Damodar temple and stayed in Vrindavan for some time, a number of years. And he wasn't just writing his stream. It wasn't just to write the Bhagavatam, so he had something to take with him to Vrindavan. There are many accounts of devotees who were there at the time, and they would, you know, they could hear Prabhupada in the middle of the night singing and chanting and doing bhajan. And kind of, you know, he's always going to remember Krishna, but they set this example that if we want to share Krishna consciousness with others, we ourselves have got to be very solidly situated in Krishna consciousness. You know, now that's not to say that we just, okay, dear, you know, Ramananda gave class this morning, so I'm not going to be doing any service for the foreseeable future. I'll be chanting 192 rounds a day and so on and so forth. You know, not necessarily like that. You know, we have to do our service, we have to do our Sankirtan, but we should, in amongst all that, really make the point that we ourselves be Krishna conscious. We ourselves read these books, study these books, chant as much as possible. Doesn't have to stop at 16 rounds a day. You know, chant as much as we possibly can, do as much kirtan as we possibly can, do as much service as we can, you know, whatever. There's different ways that we can be engaged, but be engaged as much as possible in remembering Krishna. You know, be engaged in remembering Krishna, thinking of Krishna, so that when we're chopping those vegetables or cleaning those floors or painting those walls, it's Krishna that we're thinking of. And it will be Krishna that we're thinking of if all the rest of the time we're really thinking of Krishna, or we're trying to train the mind to really think of Krishna. And then in due course of time, everything will remind us of Krishna, as it reminds Srila Prabhupada of Krishna, as we can see in these beautiful purports. So we'll stop there. If anyone's online, then we'll first of all ask the devotees who are here in the temple if anyone has any questions or comments or reflections on anything. And then after that, while we're doing that, if you want to type in any comments or any questions or anything that you want to kind of add to the program, then you can do that while devotees here are speaking. So does anyone have any questions or comments or reflections? Anything at all? Need to give them time to write. Raghunath Prabhu.
So in this purport is describing how they were very, very wealthy devotees, and according to the phrase that if you that we can become a disqualification for your Krishna consciousness, if you are like very, very wealthy, you cannot chant the name of the feeling. And I think it's also aristocratic birds, you know, beauty, like a orphan usually mentioned. Prabhupada also was born in quite aristocratic, wealthy family. Raghunath Das Goswami and Rupa Sanatana Swami were extremely wealthy, kind of didn't affect them, so we have to reconcile these facts.
Well, I mean, for a start, the two devotees that were mentioned in the purport, Hiranya and Govardhan, they actually did get into trouble because of money. they did get into big trouble, and it took Raghunath Das to kind of sort out the situation. Otherwise, they were going to be in really serious legal problems, and we read about that a little later on. But devotees who are born into these situations, like Srila Prabhupada, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami, it means that that they're born into a situation where they're able to not be concerned so much about how they're going to be situated later in life. But each one of them actually did find that it was an impediment. In their own way, it was an impediment on their journey. Raghunath Das Goswami was desperate to get away from that situation, and there's a whole 1 or 2 chapters all about Raghunath Das Goswami desperately doing. And Narottam Das Thakur was the same. Narottam Das was born into quite an aristocratic family, and he was doing everything that he possibly could to escape from that situation. Srila Prabhupada was actually trying to make money for Krishna, and Krishna was trying to, it's his leela, it's all leela, but at least from the external perspective, Prabhupada's leela is that Krishna was trying to tell him, no, that's not what I want you to do. But he kept trying to make money, he kept trying to establish businesses, and every time it was failing. And eventually he realized, wait a second, this is just taking up so much time and so much energy, and it's actually distracting me from the real mission that my spiritual master has given me, which is to write books. And when that realization came, or when he kind of revealed that realization, we have to be careful how we speak about someone like Srila Prabhupada. Then he just turned his back on it. He turned his back on everything and just went to Vrindavan and became a renunciate. Rupa and Sanatana Goswami, they just used the money that they had to get away from money. They used their money to get out of jail, to get away from where they were, and to get to Vrindavan. And at that point, it was like, I want nothing more to do with it. They gave it all away. And even Raghunath Das Goswami, his father sent him an allowance. And this is quite an interesting point. We shouldn't necessarily follow this example because we want to, build beautiful temples and do so much kind of spreading of Krishna consciousness, and for that we need money. But when Raghunath Das was in Puri with Lord Chaitanya, his father was sending him this large allowance. I think it was monthly, like a monthly allowance. And for some time he used it to feed the Vaishnavas. But then after a certain point, he was like, this is just a distraction. And he refused to accept anymore. So he wouldn't even take it to feed the Vaishnavas or to do service. He just didn't want anything more to do with money. So we shouldn't, that's not necessarily the example that we should follow. If money comes our way, we can use that to serve Krishna. But the point is that they were born into these situations, but they also found it to be an impediment to their bhakti. And so that, even though they were born in aristocratic families, they eventually left that situation. So it can be an advantage perhaps in the early stages of our bhakti that we're quite well situated, so we're able to use that time to chant Hare Krishna and to kind of build a bhakti foundation rather than worrying about where's the next meal going to come from. But at a certain point, even those who are born in aristocratic families, with exceptions, there are, like, for instance, there's who was the devotee in Chaitanya Leela who was Maharaj Vrishabhanu in Krishna Leela, Gadadhar Pandit's spiritual master. What was his name? Pundarik Vidyanidhi. So he's an avadu. He's lying on a big couch, and he has a golden spittoon next to him, and he's just, people are fanning him, and it's Gadadhar Pandit saw him and was like, who's this? And then someone quoted this verse about Putana. Lord Krishna is so merciful that even Putana, he delivered her. And as soon as he heard this verse, he just went into this raging ecstasy and started smashing everything apart. So there's exceptions to every rule, and there are personalities who are very aristocratic and at the same time very, very Krishna conscious. But in general, we should always be quite cautious in the material situation that we have. And there are examples, not even in devotional circles, but I've read of many examples in kind of non-devotional circles of quite famous persons, celebrities and businessmen and so on, who are very, very wealthy, and they make a point of several times a year going to a place in the world where no one recognizes them and just doing some charity work as a kind of reality check that, you know, all these people over there are worshiping me, but I'm still just a human being. I'm no one special just because I have this situation. You know, so even non-devotees sometimes do these things. What to speak of, you know, devotees who are in that kind of a situation. If we are in a position where, you know, we have something of an aristocratic existence, then we have to counter that with very careful, you know, activities that keep us on the. Even my spiritual master, actually, he was saying that he really likes to go out on Sankirtan. And one of the reasons he likes doing Sankirtan is because when he's at the temple, he's a Prabhupada disciple, a sannyasi, a guru, and a GBC, you know. And when he goes out in the street, he's no one. No one cares about any of these things. And he says he actually likes to do it just so that to kind of have that sort of reality check that in this little environment, I may be so many people, but in the bigger picture of things, you know, I mean, he's everything to his disciples, but it's just, you know, kind of keeping that kind of reality check and being careful around wealth and opulence. Is that okay? Is there anything online? Any comments, any questions? Okay, so we'll stop there. Thank you so much. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Sri Sri Koda Nitai Mayapo Shashi ki jai. Nitai Gaur Pramanandi Hari Bol. Hare Krishna. Gaur